Bono, From Dublin Streets to Global Stage. Hello, my friends. Today I want to tell you the remarkable story of Bono, the man who didn't just become a rock star, he became a voice for the voiceless and a force for global change. This is not just a story about music and fame, it's a journey through passion, purpose, rebellion, and compassion. Bono is one of the most influential musicians and activists in history, and his life is like an epic adventure filled with triumph, controversy, and unwavering determination. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this amazing story, perfect for your English practice, and I promise you, you will be moved by every moment of it. Chapter 1. A Boy Named Paul David Hewson. On May 10, 1960, a baby boy was born in Dublin, Ireland. His name was Paul David Hewson, but the world would come to know him as Bono. He would grow up to become the frontman of one of the biggest rock bands in history and a humanitarian who would shake hands with presidents and popes. But before all of that, he was just a working-class Irish kid trying to find his place in a divided world. Paul grew up in a modest house on Cedar Wood Road in the Ballymun neighborhood of North Dublin. His childhood was shaped by two powerful forces, love and conflict. His father, Brendan Robert Hewson, was a Catholic postal worker, quiet and reserved. His mother, Iris, was a Protestant, warm and outgoing. In Ireland, during the 1960s and 1970s, mixed marriages between Catholics and Protestants were controversial. The country was torn by religious and political tensions, especially in Northern Ireland, where violence between the two communities had erupted into what was called the Troubles. Paul's parents tried to give him and his brother Norman a balanced upbringing. They went to both Catholic and Protestant services, celebrating both traditions. But this meant Paul never fully belonged to either community. He felt like an outsider from the very beginning, neither fully Catholic nor fully Protestant. This sense of being between two worlds would shape his entire life and music. Young Paul was energetic, curious, and a bit rebellious. He loved to draw, read, and explore the streets of Dublin with his friends. His mother, Iris, was his biggest supporter. She encouraged his creativity and filled the house with warmth and laughter. Paul adored her. She was the light in his life, the person who made him feel special and loved. But when Paul was just 14 years old, tragedy struck. On September 10, 1974, his mother suffered a brain hemorrhage at his grandfather's funeral. She collapsed suddenly and was rushed to the hospital. 4 days later, Iris Hewson died. Paul was devastated. The loss of his mother at such a young age left a wound that would never fully heal. He later said that he spent the rest of his life trying to find what he lost when his mother died. After Iris's death, the Hewson household became quiet and somber. Paul's father, Bob, retreated into himself, unable to express his grief. The two boys were left to process their loss largely on their own. Paul became angry. He acted out at school, got into fights, and struggled with his emotions. He felt abandoned and lost. The pain was unbearable, and he didn't know how to cope. It was during this dark period that Paul discovered music. Music became his escape, his therapy, his way of expressing feelings he couldn't put into words. He listened to rock and roll, punk, and new wave, artists like The Clash, David Bowie, and the Ramones. The raw energy of punk rock especially spoke to him. It was angry, rebellious, and honest, just like he felt inside. Paul attended Mount Temple Comprehensive School, one of the few non-denominational schools in Ireland. At Mount Temple, Catholics and Protestants studied together, which was rare. It was there that Paul's life would change forever. One day, in September 1976, a boy named Larry Mullen Jr. posted a note on the school bulletin board. The note said, "Drummer seeks musicians to form a band." Paul saw that note and decided to show up. 7 boys gathered in Larry Mullen Jr.'s kitchen for that first rehearsal. Most of them couldn't really play their instruments well. Paul certainly couldn't sing very well. His voice was rough and untrained. But what Paul lacked in technical skill, he made up for with passion and charisma. Even then, there was something magnetic about him. He had energy, confidence, and a vision of something bigger. The band went through several names, Feedback, The Hype, before finally settling on U2. The name was short, punchy, and ambiguous. It could mean U2 or U2. It could refer to the U2 spy plane or have no meaning at all. The ambiguity was perfect. Along with Paul, the band consisted of Larry Mullen Jr. on the drums, David "The Edge" Evans on guitar, and Adam Clayton on bass. They were all teenagers with big dreams and very little experience. But Paul needed more than just his real name. He needed a persona, a stage identity. His friend Googie gave him the nickname Bono Vox, which came from a hearing aid shop in Dublin called Bono Vox, meaning good voice in Latin. Paul shortened it to just Bono. The name stuck. Paul Hewson was becoming Bono, and Bono was about to take the world. In those early days, U2 practiced in a small shed in the Edge's backyard and played at small venues around Dublin. They were terrible at first, out of tune, out of sync, and unsure of themselves. But they had something rare, genuine chemistry and a shared belief that they could be something special. They made a pact. They would stick together no matter what. They wouldn't let egos, money, or fame tear them apart. Bono was already showing signs of the performer he would become. He didn't just sing, he performed with his entire body. He climbed on speakers, jumped into crowds, and poured every ounce of emotion into each song. His stage presence was electric even in tiny Dublin clubs with audiences of 50 people. People who saw U2 in those early days knew they were witnessing something special. But Bono and U2 weren't just dreaming about being rock stars. They wanted their music to mean something. They wanted to make music that mattered, that spoke to people's hearts and souls. Bono's loss of his mother, his experience growing up between two religious communities, and his sense of being an outsider all fueled his desire to create art that was authentic and meaningful. By the time Bono was 19 years old, U2 had won a talent competition in Ireland and secured a record deal with Island Records. They were on their way. But becoming one of the biggest bands in the world wouldn't be easy. It would require years of hard work, countless setbacks, and an unwavering belief in their mission. Bono's journey was just beginning. Chapter 2: Climbing to the Top. U2 released their first album in 1980, and Bono was just 20 years old. The band was young, hungry, and determined to make their mark on the world. But becoming rock legends wouldn't happen overnight. This chapter is about U2's journey from Irish unknowns to international superstars and how Bono found his voice as both an artist and a leader. U2's first album was called Boy, released in October 1980. The album was raw and emotional, dealing with themes of innocence, adolescence, and loss. Bono's lyrics were deeply personal, reflecting his own experiences growing up and losing his mother. Songs like I Will Follow captured the pain of that loss, a boy calling out to someone who's gone, promising to follow them anywhere. Boy received positive reviews from critics who praised the band's energy and passion, but it didn't sell huge numbers. U2 was still unknown outside of Ireland and the UK. But the band wasn't discouraged. They knew they had to work harder, play more shows, and build their audience one fan at a time. And that's exactly what they did. U2 embarked on relentless touring, playing small clubs and theaters across Europe and America. They performed night after night, driving in cramped vans, sleeping in cheap hotels, and surviving on very little money. But Bono loved it. Every show was a chance to connect with people, to share their music, and to build the band's reputation. Bono's stage presence was evolving. He was becoming more confident, more theatrical, more willing to take risks. He would climb on scaffolding, wave flags, and speak directly to audiences about what the songs meant. He wasn't just entertaining people, he was trying to create moments of genuine connection and emotion. Bono believed that rock and roll concerts could be almost spiritual experiences, and he wanted every show to feel important. In 1981, U2 released their second album, October. The album dealt with themes of faith and doubt. Bono and The Edge were going through a spiritual crisis, questioning whether being in a rock band was compatible with their Christian beliefs. Some religious friends told them that rock music was sinful and that they should quit the band. Bono struggled with this conflict deeply. He loved music, but he also took his faith seriously. Ultimately, Bono and the band decided they could use their music to express their spiritual questions and beliefs. They didn't have to choose between faith and art, they could combine them. This decision shaped U2's music forever. Unlike many rock bands that rejected religion, U2 embraced spiritual themes, wrestling with questions about God, meaning, and purpose in their songs. October was even less commercial than Boy, and the band faced financial struggles, but they kept pushing forward. In 1983, U2 released War, their third album, and everything changed. War was a powerful, politically charged album that addressed the violence in Northern Ireland, the Cold War tensions, and the universal desire for peace. The album's lead single, Sunday Bloody Sunday, became U2's first major hit. Sunday Bloody Sunday was a protest song about the troubles in Northern Ireland, where British soldiers had killed 13 unarmed civilians during a peaceful protest in 1972. The song was explosive, angry, and passionate. When Bono sang it live, he would wave a white flag on stage as a symbol of peace and surrender. The image of Bono waving that white flag became iconic. It represented his desire to rise above sectarian violence and find a path to peace. But performing Sunday Bloody Sunday was risky. Some people misunderstood it as supporting one side or the other in the conflict. Bono had to carefully explain before performances that the song wasn't a rebel song, it was a peace song. He was calling for an end to violence, not taking sides. This was Bono's first major experience with the power and danger of mixing music with politics. War was a commercial success, reaching the top 10 in multiple countries. U2 was no longer just an Irish band, they were becoming an international phenomenon. Their 1983 tour brought them to larger venues, and audiences were growing rapidly. Bono's performances became legendary. He would stop songs midway to deliver passionate speeches about injustice, peace, and love. Critics accused him of being preachy, but fans loved his sincerity. In 1984, U2 released The Unforgettable Fire, produced by the legendary Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois. This album marked a shift in U2's sound. It was more atmospheric, more experimental, less punk rock, and more ambient. Songs like Pride in the Name of Love became massive hits. Pride was a tribute to Martin Luther King Jr., celebrating his message of nonviolent resistance and mourning his assassination. But it was U2's next album that would make them the biggest band in the world. In 1987, U2 released The Joshua Tree, and it was nothing short of a masterpiece. The album explored America, its beauty, its contradictions, its dreams, and its failures. Songs like Where the Streets Have No Name, I Still Haven't Found What I Am Looking For, and With or Without You became anthems that defined a generation. The Joshua Tree sold over 25 million copies worldwide. It topped the charts in over 20 countries. U2 appeared on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, Rock's Hottest Ticket. Bono was now one of the most famous rock stars on the planet. At just 27 years old, he had achieved everything most musicians dream of.
The Joshua Tree Tour was massive. Over 3 million people attended their concerts. Bono's performances reached new heights of passion and drama. During Sunday Bloody Sunday, he would spray paint slogans on stage. During Bullet the Blue Sky, he would act out scenes of violence and oppression. Every show felt like a religious experience, a political rally, and a rock concert all combined into one. But with massive success came new challenges. Bono was struggling with the pressure of fame. He worried that U2 was becoming too big, too commercial, too far from their original ideals. He saw how celebrity could corrupt artists and turn them into hollow versions of themselves. Bono didn't want that to happen to him or to U2. At the height of their success, U2 made a bold decision. They decided to leave behind everything that had made them successful and reinvent themselves completely. It was a risky move. Many thought it was crazy. But Bono believed that real artists have to take risks, have to change, have to avoid becoming predictable. And so, U2 was about to embark on their most controversial and creative period yet. Chapter 3: Reinvention and Controversy. By 1990, U2 was the biggest rock band in the world, but Bono felt trapped. He was tired of being seen as serious, preachy, and earnest. He wanted to do something shocking, something unexpected. This chapter is about U2's bold reinvention, their experiments with irony and spectacle, and how Bono learned to balance sincerity with self-awareness. After the Joshua Tree and the follow-up album Rattle and Hum, critics started turning on U2. They accused the band of being pretentious, self-important, and too serious. Some critics said Bono's passionate speeches on stage were annoying. Others said U2 had become exactly what punk rock was supposed to rebel against: pompous rock stars taking themselves too seriously. Bono was hurt by the criticism, but he also recognized some truth in it. He realized that U2 needed to change, to evolve, to challenge people's expectations. The band retreated to Berlin, Germany, in 1990 to record a new album. Berlin was the perfect place for reinvention. It was gritty, divided, and full of creative energy. The Berlin Wall had just fallen, and the city was transforming. U2 wanted to transform too. In November 1991, U2 released Achtung Baby, and it shocked everyone. The album sounded nothing like their previous work. It was darker, sexier, more electronic, and more experimental. Instead of earnest anthems about peace and justice, songs like The Fly and Mysterious Ways were ironic, playful, and full of swagger. Bono was singing in a falsetto voice, wearing leather and sunglasses, and adopting strange personas. During the subsequent Zoo TV tour, Bono created several alter egos. He became The Fly, a sleazy rock star in giant fly sunglasses spouting cynical aphorisms. He became Mirrorball Man, a greasy televangelist in a silver suit. He became Macfisto, a devil character in red horns and gold suit who would call world leaders during concerts. These characters allowed Bono to mock celebrity culture, media saturation, and even his own rock star image. The Zoo TV tour was unlike anything rock music had ever seen. The stage was covered in dozens of television screens, showing flashing images, news clips, and random phrases. Bono would make prank phone calls to the White House and pizza delivery services during shows. He would read from a book of bad reviews about U2. Everything was ironic, absurd, and over the top. Some fans were confused. They missed the sincere, passionate Bono who waved white flags and spoke about peace. But Bono believed this reinvention was necessary. He was responding to a world drowning in information, media, and cynicism. He was showing that you could use irony and spectacle to make serious points about modern life. It was intelligent, layered, and risky. Achtung Baby and Zoo TV were commercial and critical successes. U2 proved they could reinvent themselves and stay relevant. But Bono wasn't finished experimenting. In 1993, U2 released Pop, an even more experimental album exploring themes of technology, consumerism, and identity. The album won a Grammy, but it divided fans even further. During this period, Bono was also dealing with personal challenges.
In 1989, he had married his longtime girlfriend, Allie Hewson. Allie was Bono's anchor, the one person who kept him grounded in reality. She wasn't interested in fame or celebrity. She was intelligent, principled, and deeply committed to humanitarian work. Allie and Bono had known each other since they were teenagers at Mount Temple, and their love was genuine and deep. She helped Bono remember who he really was beneath the rock star persona. By the mid-1990s, Bono was ready for another change. U2 released Pop in 1997, an album influenced by electronic dance music and club culture. The Pop Mart tour featured a massive golden arch, a giant mirror ball lemon that the band emerged from, and over-the-top theatrics. But this time, the reinvention didn't work as well. Pop received mixed reviews, and some fans felt U2 had gone too far in chasing trends. Bono realized that U2 needed to return to what made them great: powerful songs, emotional performances, and genuine connection with audiences. But he had learned valuable lessons from the experimentation. He had learned that artists need to take risks, even if they sometimes fail. He had learned that irony and sincerity aren't opposites, they can work together. And he had learned that it's okay to poke fun at yourself and not take everything so seriously. In 2000, U2 released All That You Can't Leave Behind, an album that returned to the anthemic rock sound that had made them famous. Songs like Beautiful Day, Elevation, and Walk On were uplifting, hopeful, and emotionally direct. The album was a massive comeback, winning 7 Grammy Awards and selling over 12 million copies. Bono had found a way to be both sincere and self-aware, both passionate and humble. But something else was happening during this period. Bono was becoming increasingly interested in activism and humanitarian work. He had always cared about social justice, but now he wanted to do more than just sing about it. He wanted to take action. And so, alongside his music career, Bono began another journey, one that would take him to the corridors of power and make him one of the most influential activists in the world.
The reinvention years taught Bono that being an artist means constantly evolving, taking risks, and not being afraid to fail. He learned that you can't please everyone, but you have to stay true to your vision. And he learned that sometimes the best way to be sincere is to acknowledge the absurdity of your own position. These lessons would serve him well in the next phase of his life, when he would step off the stage and into the world of global politics and humanitarian work. Chapter 4. From Rock Star to Activist. Bono had conquered the music world, but he wanted to do more. He wanted to use his fame and influence to fight poverty, disease, and injustice. This chapter is about how Bono became one of the world's most prominent activists, his controversial methods, and his determination to make a real difference beyond music. Bono's journey into activism began in 1985 when he was just 25 years old. That year, he and his wife Allie traveled to Ethiopia to work at a relief camp during the devastating famine. What Bono witnessed there changed him forever. He saw children dying from malnutrition and preventable diseases. He saw families torn apart by poverty and suffering. He realized that while he was playing rock concerts to thousands of people, millions were suffering needlessly. When Bono returned from Ethiopia, he couldn't shake what he had seen. He had participated in Live Aid, the massive benefit concert organized by Bob Geldof to raise money for famine relief. But he felt that wasn't enough. Charity concerts might raise awareness, but they didn't address the root causes of poverty. Bono wanted to do something more systemic, more lasting. Throughout the 1990s, Bono began educating himself about economics, debt, and development. He read books, talked to experts, and studied how global financial systems kept poor countries trapped in poverty. He learned that many African countries were spending more money repaying debts to wealthy countries than they were spending on healthcare and education. It was a system that perpetuated poverty and suffering.
In 1999, Bono joined the Jubilee 2000 campaign, a movement calling for the cancellation of debt for the world's poorest countries. He traveled to Washington, D.C., meeting with politicians, economists, and policymakers. This is where Bono's activism took an unexpected turn. He started working with people he might have protested against in his younger days. Bono met with conservative politicians like Senator Jesse Helms, known for his right-wing views. He met with Republican lawmakers, World Bank officials, and business leaders. Many of Bono's liberal friends were shocked. Why was this rock star who had sung protest songs now shaking hands with conservatives? Was he selling out? Had fame corrupted him? But Bono had a different perspective. He believed that if you want to change things, you have to work with people in power, even if you disagree with them on many issues. He learned to speak the language of conservatives, framing debt relief not as charity, but as a moral imperative and smart economic policy. He convinced Senator Helms that debt relief was a Christian duty. He persuaded conservative lawmakers that helping African countries develop would create new markets for American goods. Bono's pragmatic approach was controversial among activists. Some accused him of being naive, of being used by politicians for photo opportunities. Others said he was too willing to compromise with the powerful. But Bono believed that real change requires working within the system, building coalitions, and finding common ground with people you might otherwise oppose. In 2004, Bono co-founded DATA, Debt, AIDS, Trade, Africa, an organization dedicated to fighting poverty and disease in Africa. The organization lobbied governments, raised awareness, and pushed for increased aid and debt relief. Bono traveled constantly, meeting with presidents, prime ministers, and world leaders. He testified before Congress. He spoke at the United Nations. He became as comfortable in suits at political summits as he was in leather jackets on stage. Bono's friendship with world leaders became famous and controversial. He developed close relationships with Presidents George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. He met with Pope John Paul II, and later with Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis. He spoke at World Economic Forums in Davos, alongside billionaires and business moguls. For a rock star who had sung revolutionary songs, this was an unexpected turn. Critics questioned whether Bono was too close to power. They wondered if he was being manipulated, if his activism was all publicity, if he was just massaging his own ego. Some activists preferred the confrontational approach, protests, demonstrations, and radical demands. Bono's approach was different. He believed in persistent, quiet diplomacy combined with public pressure. In 2004, Bono co-founded One Campaign, an advocacy organization fighting extreme poverty and preventable disease, particularly in Africa. One wasn't a charity, it didn't ask for donations. Instead, it mobilized citizens to pressure their governments to do more. The campaign had a simple message: extreme poverty is solvable if wealthy countries commit just 1% of their budgets to effective aid. One Campaign grew rapidly, gaining millions of members worldwide. Bono recruited celebrities, business leaders, and everyday citizens to join the cause. He organized massive awareness campaigns and used his concerts to educate audiences about global poverty. He made activism accessible, showing people that they could make a difference by signing petitions and contacting their representatives. In 2005, Bono helped organize Live 8, a series of concerts aimed at pressuring world leaders attending the G8 summit to address poverty in Africa. The concerts took place simultaneously in multiple countries, featuring the biggest acts in music. The goal wasn't just to raise money, it was to create political pressure, and it worked. The G8 countries agreed to double aid to Africa and cancel the debt of 18 of the poorest countries. But Bono knew that aid alone wasn't enough. African countries also needed better governance, less corruption, and economic development.
In 2007, he co-founded Product Red, a brand partnership initiative where companies donate a percentage of sales to fight AIDS in Africa. Companies like Apple, Gap, and Starbucks created Red products, generating hundreds of millions of dollars for AIDS prevention and treatment in Africa. Again, critics questioned this approach. Was commercialism the right way to fight disease? Was it ethical to use consumerism to promote humanitarian causes? Bono argued that it was pragmatic. People were going to buy products anyway, so why not direct some of that money towards saving lives? He believed in using every tool available, even if it made purists uncomfortable.
Throughout his activism, Bono faced constant criticism. Some said he was a hypocrite because U2 moved part of their business to the Netherlands for tax purposes. Others said he was naive about the complexities of development economics. Some accused him of having a white savior complex, thinking he could solve Africa's problems without listening to Africans themselves. Bono listened to these criticisms and tried to learn from them. Over time, Bono adjusted his approach. He made efforts to amplify African voices, partnering with African activists and organizations. He acknowledged that many of his early efforts had been paternalistic and that he still had much to learn. He recognized that the problems were more complex than he initially understood. By the 2010s, Bono's activism had achieved real results. Debt relief helped lift millions out of poverty. AIDS treatment programs saved millions of lives. Child mortality rates in Africa dropped significantly. These weren't just abstract statistics, they represented real people, real families, real lives saved and improved. Bono could see that his work, however imperfect, was making a genuine difference. But this dual life, rock star and activist, came with costs. Bono was constantly exhausted, traveling the world for concerts and political meetings. He spent less time with his family. His activism sometimes overshadowed U2's music. Some fans wished he would just focus on being a musician, but Bono couldn't ignore what he had learned about poverty and injustice. Once you've seen suffering up close, you can't unsee it. Chapter 5: Legacy, Lessons, and the Never-Ending Journey. Bono is now in his 60s, and his journey continues. He's released more albums, continued his activism, faced health challenges, and grappled with his legacy. This final chapter explores what Bono's life teaches us about passion, purpose, and the courage to use your gifts for something bigger than yourself. In the 2000s and 2010s, U2 continued to be one of the world's biggest rock bands. They released albums like How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, 2004, which won 9 Grammy Awards, and No Line on the Horizon, 2009. They embarked on massive tours, including the 360-degree tour, 2009 to 2011, which became the highest-grossing concert tour in history at that time, earning over $736 million. But U2 also faced new controversies. In 2014, they partnered with Apple to automatically download their new album, Songs of Innocence, to every iTunes user's device, over 500 million people. U2 and Apple thought it was a generous gift. Instead, many people were angry that music was forced onto their devices without permission. The backlash was intense, and Bono had to apologize. It was a humbling reminder that good intentions don't always translate to good outcomes. Bono also faced health challenges. In 2014, he suffered serious injuries in a cycling accident in Central Park, breaking his arm in 6 places, fracturing his eye socket, and injuring his shoulder. He required 5 hours of surgery and extensive rehabilitation. The accident forced Bono to slow down and reflect on his mortality and priorities. He realized he wasn't invincible and needed to take better care of himself. Throughout these years, Bono's activism continued. He met with every U.S. president from Bill Clinton to Joe Biden, maintaining relationships across political divides. He testified before Congress multiple times.
He spoke at countless conferences and summits. He used every opportunity to push for progress on extreme poverty, disease, and inequality. In 2016, Bono wrote an article for the New York Times titled "The Good News on Poverty." Yes, there's good news, using data to show that extreme poverty had been cut in half over the previous 20 years. He wanted people to know that progress was possible, that their advocacy and donations were working. In a world of constant bad news, Bono tried to remind people that positive change was happening. One campaign and Product Red continued to grow and evolve. By 2020, Product Red had generated over $650 million for AIDS programs, providing treatment and prevention services to millions of people. One campaign had helped pressure governments to commit billions in additional aid to Africa. These weren't perfect solutions, but they represented real progress. In 2022, Bono published his memoir, Surrender: 40 Songs, One Story. The book was honest and revealing, organized around 40 U2 songs that marked important moments in his life. Bono wrote about his mother's death, his struggles with faith, his marriage, his activism, and his mistakes. He acknowledged his flaws, his ego, his stubbornness, his tendency to dominate conversations. It was a surprisingly humble book from someone often accused of arrogance. In the memoir, Bono reflected on what he had learned from his decades of activism. He wrote about the importance of working with people you disagree with, the necessity of persistence, and the value of both idealism and pragmatism. He acknowledged that he made mistakes, that some of his efforts had failed, and that the problems were more complex than he once understood. But he also affirmed that trying to make a difference, even imperfectly, was better than doing nothing. U2's music continued to evolve. Their 2023 residency at the Sphere in Las Vegas showcased cutting-edge technology and visual effects, reminding everyone that the band still knew how to innovate and surprise. At over 60 years old, Bono was still performing with the energy and passion of a young man, still connecting with audiences, still seeking to create meaningful experiences through music. Looking back at Bono's life, what can we learn from his journey? First, that passion matters. Bono's entire career has been driven by passion. Passion for music, passion for justice, passion for making a difference. He never did anything halfway. Whether he was performing on stage or meeting with world leaders, he brought his whole self to every moment. Second, that it's okay to be imperfect. Bono has made many mistakes. He's been preachy, arrogant, and naive at times. His activism has sometimes been clumsy and his approaches controversial, but he kept learning, kept adjusting, kept trying. Perfection isn't required to make a difference. Sincerity and persistence are what matter.
Third, that you can use your platform for good. Bono didn't have to become an activist. He could have just enjoyed being a rock star, making music, and living a comfortable life. But he chose to use his fame and influence to fight for people who had no voice. He showed that celebrities can do more than just entertain. They can leverage their platforms for important causes. Fourth, that changing the world requires working with unlikely allies. Bono learned that meaningful change doesn't come from purity or ideological rigidity. It comes from building coalitions, finding common ground, and persuading people who might initially disagree with you. This approach isn't always popular with activists, but it gets results. Fifth, that art and activism can coexist. Some people said Bono should stick to music. Others said he should quit music and focus on activism. But Bono proved you don't have to choose. His music gave him the platform to amplify his activism, and his activism gave his music deeper meaning and purpose. The two reinforced each other. But perhaps the most important lesson from Bono's life is this: you don't have to be perfect to make a difference. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to wait until you're ready. You just need to start, to take action, to do what you can with what you have. Bono wasn't an expert on economics or development when he started his activism. He educated himself along the way.
He made mistakes and faced criticism, but he never stopped trying. Today, Bono continues both his music and his activism. U2 still tours and records. Bono still meets with world leaders and advocates for change. He's still learning, still evolving, still refusing to stay in one place. At an age when many rock stars are content to tour their greatest hits and rest on their laurels, Bono is still pushing forward, still believing that things can get better, still fighting for a more just world. Bono's story reminds us that one person can make a difference, not by being perfect, not by having all the answers, but by caring deeply and refusing to give up. It reminds us that our gifts, whether musical talent, public speaking, or any other ability, can be used for something bigger than ourselves. And it reminds us that the most meaningful life is one lived not just for personal success, but for the good of others. So, my friends, let Bono's story inspire you to find your own purpose. What do you care deeply about? What breaks your heart? What could you do to make things better? You don't need to be a rock star or meet with presidents to make a difference. You just need to start where you are, use what you have, and refuse to be indifferent to suffering. Be like Bono, passionate, persistent, and willing to take risks for what you believe in. Don't let criticism stop you. Don't wait for perfection. Don't worry about being popular. Just care deeply, work hard, and keep moving forward. The world needs people who refuse to accept things as they are and who dare to imagine something better. What did you think of this incredible journey? Isn't Bono's story one of the most inspiring examples of using fame for good? Let his life remind you that success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself, it's about what you do for others. Never stop believing that change is possible. Never stop fighting for what matters. Never stop using your gifts to make the world a little bit better. Be like Bono, unafraid, uncompromising, and unforgettable.